Stabstabber's School as Organization, an intellectual quest to explain an unusual institution. The study of schools as organizations emerged from a simple but surprisingly difficult observation. Schools resemble organizations in many respects, yet they rarely behave as organizational theory would predict. While mainstream organizational research sought general principles applicable to all organizations, scholars of education increasingly argued that schools constituted a special case whose internal dynamics required a different conceptual vocabulary. One of the earliest and most influential voices in this direction was Charles Bidwell. Rather than asking how schools fit existing organizational theories, he asked whether existing theories could adequately describe schools at all. The defining characteristic of schools, he argued, lies in the peculiar relationship between teachers and students. Teaching requires maintaining authority over individuals who often have little intrinsic motivation to pursue the tasks assigned to them. The classroom, therefore, embodies a permanent tension between educational standards and student engagement. In Bidwell's memorable formulation decades later, teaching becomes an endless effort to reconcile what cannot truly be reconciled. The central activity of the organization is built upon a relationship that is, to some degree, inherently antagonistic. Once this paradox was recognized, a broader theoretical question emerged. If the core activity of schools is so difficult to coordinate and control, what holds schools together? Why do they display remarkable continuity despite weak supervision over teaching, uncertain technologies of instruction, and limited agreement about educational goals? This question gradually became the organizing problem of the field. Rather than producing one dominant theory, it encouraged researchers to borrow concepts from across organizational studies, each illuminating a different aspect of educational organizations. John Meyer approached the puzzle by arguing that schools persist not because teaching is tightly coordinated internally, but because educational activity is coordinated socially rather than organizationally. Classrooms remain largely insulated from direct managerial control. Teachers enjoy considerable autonomy, and effective technologies of instruction are often uncertain. Yet schools appear remarkably stable because society provides shared understandings of what schools, teachers, students, and curricula are supposed to be. Organizational stability is therefore generated less by internal control than by institutionalized meanings embedded in the surrounding social environment. Karl Weick translated this observation into the language of organizational structure through the metaphor of loose coupling. Schools were not chaotic. Rather, their components remained only partially connected. Administrators, teachers, classrooms, curricula, and instructional outcomes influenced one another without becoming tightly integrated. Loose coupling explained how schools could simultaneously exhibit stability and flexibility, preserving institutional continuity, while allowing substantial local variation in classroom practice. At approximately the same time, James March and his collaborators offered a different, though related, perspective. Educational organizations became the classic example of organized anarchies, settings characterized by ambiguous goals, unclear technologies, and fluid participation. Decisions often resembled the famous garbage can process, where problems, solutions, participants, and opportunities happen to intersect rather than following orderly sequences of rational planning. These ideas challenge the assumption that organizational action necessarily reflected coherent intentions or carefully designed decision processes. Although these theories differed substantially in their assumptions and intellectual origins, educational research increasingly adopted them as complementary rather than competing perspectives. Schools appeared simultaneously bureaucratic and decentralized, institutionalized yet loosely coordinated, politically contested yet socially integrated, orderly in appearance yet often anarchic in practice. Rather than choosing among these descriptions, scholars frequently combine them into a shared conceptual language for describing the peculiar organizational character of schooling. Review articles and integrative frameworks reflected this development. Educational organizations were portrayed as possessing multiple organizational faces, rational systems pursuing educational goals, political arenas negotiating competing interests, social communities sustained by trust and shared norms, and organized anarchies characterized by ambiguity and improvisation. Theories originally developed for different purposes were assembled into a broader interpretive toolkit capable of capturing the hybrid nature of schools. Viewed historically, this eclecticism was not simply theoretical inconsistency. It reflected the persistence of a single underlying question, first articulated by early organizational sociologists of education. What binds together an organization whose central work is difficult to monitor, difficult to standardize, and often difficult to motivate? Each imported theory offered a partial answer. Institutional theory emphasized legitimacy. Loose coupling explained decentralized coordination. Organized anarchy highlighted ambiguity in decision-making. Political perspectives stressed negotiation and conflict. Social system approaches emphasized trust and shared culture. The history of organizational research on schools can therefore be understood not as a succession of competing paradigms, but as an ongoing search for the forces that hold together one of the most unusual organizational forms in modern society. The remarkable achievement of this literature is that it transformed what initially appeared to be organizational weaknesses: ambiguity, decentralization, autonomy, and uncertain technologies, into defining characteristics requiring explanation rather than anomalies to be ignored. In doing so, it established the school not merely as another organization, but as one of organizational theory's most revealing empirical laboratories.